everybody, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Master 88 here, and welcome to the Orichalcos Challenge Nightmare Mode Deck Profile Update. It's been a little while since Nightmare Mode was last seen. Last time you guys saw this was in the follow-up to the Dueling Book Live event that I did several months back. Well, since that follow-up, it has gone through some more changes, and this is going to be a very interesting video for you all. I'm hoping that it doesn't take me too long to show you guys this deck, because there is a lot to go through, especially when we're dealing with a 60-card build here. But anyway, I don't want to waste time, so let's get started. And oh, before I forget, I'm still tweaking with my lighting here. Essentially, I'm using this old camera pod with this little microphone blocker, something like that, in order to sit my spare phone on top of it. This way I could shine my phone's flashlight down. It's essentially the only way I know how to get better lighting in order for you guys to see the cards better. There's gonna be some trial and error, but eventually I'll figure it out. Anyway, what do you all say we get started, shall we? Alright, the first thing we're gonna cover in Nightmare Mode is the two headliners of Nightmare Mode, of course. Neo Orichalcos Shaman and Neo Orichalcos Sorcerer. They both have had some slight, teeny, tiny modifications, but other than that, they are pretty much the same exact, erratas that I introduced to you all in the follow-up to the Dueling Book Live event that I did several months back. But for those who don't know how the Neo Orichalcos archetype works, I'll give a brief explanation before I go into what Neo Orichalcos Shaman and Sorcerer do. Essentially, to summarize this, the Neo Orichalcos archetype, it was a collaboration project between me and Florentine Yugioh. Shout out to you, bro. Thank you for helping. Thank you for the time that we spent developing this very powerful series of cards. But anyway, he's an awesome guy. Check him out. I'll link him in the description bar below, and mcold40 once again. Shout out to both of you all. Amazing content. Anyway, the Neo Orichalcos series was a series of powerful cards that me and Florentine Yugioh developed over a decade ago, over pretty much 11 years ago. 11 years ago is when these cards were developed. Now at that time, they were in essentially prototype alpha phase, essentially. And in their original iteration, they were very powerful right off the bat. Essentially, they all essentially one effect these cards shared in common. That effect being is that these cards could not be destroyed or banished by the opponent's card effects. Also at that time, they had a lot more OP effects on them, and from early 2013 to late 2013, early 2014, this series got so OP and so powerful that around early 2014, me and Florentine Yugioh had to make a decision, both of us, and we decided that this project had to be banned. So it was banned for literally 10 long years. That that is until 2021. Um 9 years after I banned them in 2021, I was talking to Time Yugioh, and I told him that I was bringing this long dead project back to life. And lo and behold, here they all are. Um, Orichalcos Sorcerer, though, if I may say this, he's a new addition to the family. I've only made him like several months ago. But Orichalcos Shaman, he's one of the originals. Made him many moons ago, like well over a decade ago. But anyway, when I brought this project back, I nerfed this project into the ground and essentially just rebuilt them from the ground up. They're still quite powerful, but not as powerful as they used to be. But they all share one effect in common now. Similar to Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon, they cannot be targeted or be destroyed by the opponent's card effects. But non-targeting effects or skill drain or anything of that sort can affect this deck and hurt it. So the Orichalcos deck, aka the Nightmare Mode deck, does have some weaknesses that can be easily exploited. Sorry. Anyway, I'm gonna stop blabbering. Let's get into the deck. So we have Orichalcos Shaman and Sorcerer here. Essentially, Orichalcos Shaman is essentially a juiced up version of the original Shaman, and Sorcerer is a juiced up version of the original Orichalcos Sorcerer. In fact, I'll just interject this last thing, and then I'll get right back to reading these for you guys. A lot of the cards in here are juiced up versions of the original Orichalcos monsters. Just wanted to point that out. Anyway, the Orichalcos Shaman. Essentially, like I said, they all share one effect in common. Cannot be targeted or be destroyed by the opponent's card effects. If this card is normal or special summoned, special summon one level 4 lower Orichalcos monster from your hand, deck, graveyard, or that you have currently banished. So it can bring out stuff in many different areas. You can shuffle up to 5 cards with different names in your graveyard into your deck, then draw 2 cards. You can change this card's level from 1 to 12. You can treat this card as a Dark Tuner monster for a Dark Synchro Summon this turn. If this card is used for a Dark Synchro Summon, shuffle this card in your graveyard into your deck. Add 1 Orichalcos card from your deck or graveyard to your hand, except Orichalcos Shaman. You can only control 1 Orichalcos Shaman on the field. You can only use each effect of Orichalcos Shaman once per turn only. So he's a lot more balanced, but he's balanced in a way to where he's not really a very dangerously OP threat. But at the same time, I managed to keep his powers intact, essentially. So that's Orichalcos Shaman in a nutshell. The next card is this guy here, Orichalcos Sorcerer, the new kid on the block. So essentially what he does is, if this card is special summoned by the effect of a level 4 lower Orichalcos monster, you can special summon 1 level 4 lower Orichalcos monster from your hand, deck, graveyard, or that you have currently banished. You can target 1 Fusion, Synchro, Dark Synchro, or Xyz monster in your graveyard, return it to the extra deck, and you can also change this card's level from 1 to 12. If this card is used for a Fusion, Synchro, Dark Synchro, or Xyz summon, you can add an Orichalcos card from your deck, graveyard, or that you have currently banished to your hand. You can only control 1 Orichalcos Sorcerer on the field. You can only use each effect of Orichalcos Sorcerer once per turn only. So, he's pretty good. Very good, even. But just like with Orichalcos Shaman, he's got some checks and balances on him. Next up, what I'm gonna show you all guys, is 2 copies of Orichalcos Shunoros. So this is a juiced up version of Orichalcos Shunoros, essentially what I like to call Shunoros on crack. What this little guy does, and I'll explain briefly. Essentially, it cannot be normal summoned or set. You can special summon this card from your hand by paying 1,000 life points. If another Orichalcos monster you control would be targeted for an attack, you can make that attack a direct attack. All damage you take drops to 0. If this card leaves the field, you can special summon 1 Orichalcos Shunoros from your hand, deck, graveyard, or that you have currently banished. So, essentially, juiced up Shunoros, like I said. Next up, let's get these guys over here so they're not in the way. We have Orichalcos Shunoros, Orichalcos Dexia, and Aristaros. Now, they used to be arms, but Dexia and Aristaros are now their own individual monsters with this type of build. And plus, all 3 of them have some pretty unique things that they can do. Hold on just a minute. There we go. Sorry, I had to mute my phone there for a minute, just so it doesn't disturb the recording. Anyway, back to these 3. So essentially, they're juiced up versions of their original counterparts, but just to summarize these guys right there for a minute. So essentially, with Orichalcos Shunoros, it cannot be normal summoned or set, cannot be special summoned except with Orichalcos Shunoros. This card's original attack is equal to the total amount of damage reduced to 0 by the effect of the Orichalcos Shunoros that summoned this card. Once per turn only, you can have this card gain 500 attack. If this card is special summoned, you can special summon 1 Orichalcos Dexia and Orichalcos Aristaros from your hand, deck, and or graveyard, or that you have currently banished. If this card leaves the field, special summon 1 Divine Serpent from your hand, deck, graveyard, or that you have currently banished. So that's what this guy does. He can be a pretty big beatstick in a hurry. Now to get to his proteges here. First, starting off with Orichalcos Dexia. So, just like with the original trio, Dexia cannot be normal summoned or set. It can at least be special summoned except with Orichalcos Shunoros. And just like its original predecessor, when it battles an opponent's monster, the attack of this card becomes equal to either that attack position monster's attack, or that defense position monster's defense times 400. Plus 400. Sorry. Looks like a multiplication symbol for a minute, but it's a plus symbol. Until the end of the damage step. Once per turn only, you can banish 1 monster on the field. So essentially, in a nutshell, this thing is always 300 attack points higher than the monster it's battling. Aristaros here, just to summarize, it's always free. Got tongue-tied. This thing is always 400 attack points higher than the monster it's battling in attack points. In defense points, this thing is always 400 defense points higher than the monster it's battling. But the additional effect that I've added onto Orichalcos Aristaros is to where once per turn only I can banish 1 spell and trap on the field. So you got back row removal and monster removal and 2 cards. Next up, we have Neo Divine Serpent. So essentially, just like with the original trio, when Orichalcos Shunoros goes, his proteges go with him, and when they all go, boom, you get this monster right here. And unlike the original Divine Serpent, essentially the clause where I get rid of my hand and my life points drop to 0, but as long as I remain in game, I don't lose. Those conditions are not on the Neo Orichalcos version. Those conditions don't exist with this version, so I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Plus the additional effect I put on it is once per turn only, I can banish 2 cards from my graveyard to banish 3 random cards in my opponent's hand, so I can deal with their hand as well. And just like the normal Divine Serpent, he cannot attack unless I send the top 10 cards of my deck to the graveyard. So that's Neo Divine Serpent in a nutshell. Next up, we have Neo Orichalcos Doom Beetle. So this is Doom Beetle's Neo Orichalcos counterpart. It has some similarities to the original, but modified. Here's how he works. Essentially, if this card leaves the field while you control a face-up Orichalcos field spell, apply one of these effects. I can either inflict 800 damage to my opponent for each card in their graveyard. I can special summon this card in attack position, gain 800 life points for each card in my hand, or I can fusion summon 1 Orichalcos fusion monster from my action deck using Orichalcos monsters from my hand or deck as material. So this guy, this guy has the capabilities of essentially helping me get fusion monsters out, which in the future I will have some Orichalcos fusion monsters made, but that's a future project though. But that's Neo. Excuse me. Sorry, I had a feather in my throat. So that's Neo Orichalcos Doom Beetle in a nutshell. Next up, we have Neo Orichalcos Gygus. So yeah, this guy, I only run one of him, only need to run one, but unlike the original Gygus, this guy is a bit more threatening than the original, and here's why that is. Essentially, if he leaves the field, by any means necessary, including getting banished, you can special summon it immediately. If this card is special summoned by its own effect, this card gains 500 attack times the number of times it was summoned by its own effect during the duel. And unlike the original, I don't have to skip my draw phase. So yeah, this thing leaves the field by any means necessary. It just boom, back. Whoops! Sorry about that, it looks like Gygus took a ride there. That was a funny. Anyway, that's Gygus in a nutshell. Next up, Neo Orichalcos Malevolence. So, how Neo Orichalcos Malevolence works is, once per turn you can target one monster your opponent controls and change its battle position. And if this card inflicts damage, my opponent banishes the top 4 cards of their deck to the graveyard. So, if it does damage to you, you're going to be saying goodbye to some cards. It's that simple. Next up, Neo Orichalcos Swordsman. Now, this one was... I think you could say it's a new edition, but it's been around for over a decade. I created this guy on the old Yugioh card maker back around 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. But how he works is if this card attacks or is attacked, It gains 300 attack during the damage step only. And if this card destroys a monster in battle, it can attack one additional time this turn. So essentially, it can get some good hits in. Next up, we got these two guys. Orichalcos Fiend and Orichalcos Necromancer. These are original Orichalcos monsters. They were made by my friend Jason many years ago. But their original versions were lost to time. I could never find them. So I pretty much, for the purposes of the revival of the Orichalcos deck, I pretty much took it upon myself to remake these guys. So essentially, both Orichalcos Necromancer and Fiend do have some similarities to their original counterparts, but for all intents and purposes, they are juiced up versions of their counterparts, respectfully. So let's talk about Orichalcos Necromancer first. So if this card is normal or special summoned, I shuffle an Orichalcos card in my graveyard into my deck, then I draw one card. I can banish one Orichalcos spell or trap from my graveyard to add an Orichalcos spell or trap from my graveyard to my hand. So at the cost of a card, I can get one. It's just that simple. And for Orichalcos Fiend, if this card is normal or special summoned, I can add an Orichalcos card from my deck, graveyard, or that I have currently banished to my hand. If this card inflicts battle damage to my opponent, I banish one card from my opponent's graveyard. So essentially, it's sort of like Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer, except I can only banish one card. One only. So that's those two. Next up, just like in the previous Orichalcos builds, for the Nightmare Mode challenge, specifically, I'm running all 3 Egyptian god cards in their complete anime forms. So we got Obelisk, Slifer, and Ra. And with Ra, and with the Winged Dragon of Ra specifically, he does I know all of his anime effects by heart, and one addition I am adding to his rulings is essentially if I were to recite the chant correctly, I have permanent control of him. But if I recite the chant wrong, the opponent has the ability to recite the Winged Dragon of Ra's chant, and if they get it correct, they gain control of Ra. So essentially, I'm implementing that aspect of the Winged Dragon of Ra's anime effect into the challenge. As for Slifer and Obelisk, sorry. As for Slifer and Obelisk, they're pretty much the same. Full-blown anime effects from the show. You know them, you love them, you can't live without them. So that's these 3. Next up, you gotta run the famous tour guide engine, along with a pre-errata Witch and Singan to boot. Love those Xyz plays. Love those searchability plays. It's just that simple. It's an Orichalcos deck's best friend. Is this engine right here. Next up, just like with my high power, just like with the normal difficulty, I run triple Darkness Seed. I don't need to explain Darkness Seed again. If you want to know what he does, check out the normal mode deck profile. Okay. Next up, We have One Night Beam, the Darkest Pony. Um, if you've seen my normal deck profile, you should know what that does. Very nice searchability for my field spells. But I will be explaining what these. 2 copies of Orichalcos Defender. Now, I found this card many years ago. Its original effect was okay, but I wanted to spice it up a little bit. So, here's what Defender does. If your opponent's monster declares an attack, special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, in the battle phase, you must control an Orichalcos field spell to activate and resolve the effect. So essentially, it is battle phase nullification, essentially. Okay. Next up, we got 1 copy of Disgraced Mage. Now, this guy is a wonderful support card for the Nightmare Mode deck, and one of my favorite anime cards. I tend to use this guy in my Dark Synchro deck for anime mode purposes from time to time. It's just I don't use him too often. But what he does, for those who don't know, is if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, shuffle that monster into the deck instead of sending it into the graveyard. If this card is destroyed by battle and you would take battle damage, you can shuffle this card and all cards in your hand to the deck instead. So yeah, it has some really nice utility, in my opinion. Plus, for 1700 attack, who wouldn't want to run this? Next up is one of the exclusive cards in the Nightmare Mode variant. The anime version of Reaper of the Cards. So, what makes this thing different than the version we know and love? Simple. He is a flip effect monster, but at the same time, his flip effect's a good one. Here's what it does. This card can attack and destroy face-down spell or traps as if they were attack position monsters with 1,000 attack and defense points during your battle phase. So what does that mean? Essentially, unlike most monsters in the game, the anime version of Reaper of the Cards can attack spell and trap cards even though they're in the spell and trap card zone, but in return, those face-down spell and traps are attacked and destroyed as if they were monsters with 1,000 attack and defense points. Meaning, I'll be able to do some damage. That's simply how Reaper of the Cards works. Next up, we get into the spells and traps. I run 3 copies of the Neo Seal of Orichalcos. This is essentially the Neo Orichalcos variant of the Seal of Orichalcos. Same spell speed for negation, same spell and trap card zones as monster zones effects, yada yada yada. But the difference with this version, comparing it to the UDE seal, the normal one, is this one has the effects of Orichalcos Deutros and Tritos built into it. Meaning, I don't need to have Deutros and Tritos physically in my deck anymore. Because the Neo Seal of Orichalcos does that for me. And other than that, it pretty much doesn't have any other additional effects other than the effects of Deutros and Tritos built into it. It's pretty much that simple. Other than the additions, it's the simple UDE seal you know and love, spell speed 4 negation, your spell and track card zone treated as a monster joins, yada yada yada. It's just that simple. Next up, I run 2 Chosen Destiny and Orichalcos Gateway. Now, I know it's been a little while since you guys seen this, but for those who don't remember, Orichalcos Gateway was my Orichalcos Eye replacement for the longest time, for many, many years. Up until I revived my Orichalcos challenge in 2021 with the new system that I have now. The easy mode, normal mode, nightmare, hard mode, soon to be hard mode. Keep a lookout for that, and nightmare mode. But I made one new addition to Orichalcos Gateway that now has it permanently locked in Nightmare mode. Other than the 2 effects you have known very well throughout the years, such as these 2 effects, you can pay 500 life points to shuffle 1 Orichalcos card from your hand or graveyard into the deck, draw 1 card, or the other effect is pretty much identical to Orichalcos Eye. You pay 1,000 to add an Orichalcos from your deck to your hand. The new effect that I added on to this is I contribute an Orichalcos monster I control to destroy 2 spell or traps my opponent controls. Back row removal at the cost of 1 of your monsters. But it ain't going to matter anyway, because if you know the Orichalcos Shaman shuffling ability, that monster I distributed is just going to be sent back to the deck anyway, so it won't matter. But the thing is, though, just like all my past Orichalcos deck profiles, I can only use one of these effects once per turn. So that's essentially that. And you guys know what Chosen Destiny is. I don't need to explain it. If you want to know how it works, you can check out my easy mode update or my normal mode update. Next up, we have 1 copy of the Neo Stone. Now, my buddy Florentine Yugioh, he created this card many years ago, like over a decade ago. I don't remember what the original version did. I would have to look at his Neo Orichalcos deck profile from 2013 to figure that out. But I decided, why not? I might as well redo it, make it more modernized, and make it just a little bit better. So, what the Neo Stone does is it's essentially also always treated as an Orichalcos card, so it can be searched, and it's a quick play spell card to boot. I can only activate this while I control an Orichalcos field spell. I tribute 1 Neo Orichalcos monster, add 1 Neo Orichalcos card from your deck or graveyard to your hand. You can banish this card from your graveyard, draw 2 cards. You can only use each effect of Neo Stone once per turn only. So essentially, I can only use each effect once per turn only. And it's got really nice effects on it. So that's the Neo Stone. I only run 1 of it. Then I got, for staples, I got Monster Reborn. Good old Monster Reborn, still used today. Then I got 1 copy of 10. Now, I bet you are wondering, what does 10 do? I'll tell you what it does. 10 simply put it, 10 allows me to draw 10 cards from my deck, but I can only activate 1/10 per turn. So yeah, I just draw a whole bunch of cards out of one spell, off of one spell card. Isn't that delightful? Next up, Orichalcos Power Wave. Now, this is one of the secret weapons that I developed to counteract my friend Jason's Orichalcos deck a number of years ago, many years ago. The original version was very OP, which is why in recent years I modified it, made some changes, and now it's less broken than what it used to be. This is what Power Wave does. Activate only if you control 4 more Orichalcos monsters with different names. Activate one of the following effects. I can either Regeki your board, Harpy's Feather Dust your board, or I can just send your entire hand to the graveyard. But I can only activate one Orichalcos Power Wave per turn. So it's restricted, but I can choose one effect that'll be beneficial to me for the duel. Next up, we got Bounce. Good old Bounce. So this anime card is one that was used in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! And what this does is I take control of a face-up spell card on the field and activate its effects as though I activated it. So say you activate Called by the Grave, for example. Since this thing is a quick play spell card, I can chain this to your Called by the Grave and take your Called by the Grave's effect as though I activated it. It's that simple. Next up, Orichalcos Shield. This is the second of my secret weapons. So what does Orichalcos Shield do? I'll tell you. During either player's turn, you can discard this card from your hand to the graveyard to activate it. And if you do, you take no damage for your opponent's next 4 turns. You can only activate one Orichalcos Shield per turn. So for my opponent's turns, I take no battle damage and no effect damage. Very nice protection there. Next up, Orichalcos Time Freeze. Now, I don't need to tell you what the full effects of this thing is, but I will say that I can only activate it during my opponent's turn while I control an Orichalcos field spell, and it's a once per duel effect. But essentially, what Time Freeze is, it is a Orichalcos version of Mischief of the Time Goddess. It's completely identical to Mischief of the Time Goddess, except Orichalcos based. Next up is the 4th secret weapon, Orichalcos Impact. Now, what this normal spell card does is, if this card is activated, I target one monster I control. Then destroy one monster my opponent controls that's attack is equal to or less than the targeted Orichalcos monster's attack. So this allows me to get rid of a pesky monster that I might find annoying or so, but I have to make sure that the targeted monster, that the opponent's monster that I use this thing on, I have to make sure that its attack is less than or equal to my targeted Orichalcos monster's attack. So that's how that works. And now, folks, we get to the 5th and final secret weapon. And the most overpowered, busted, I could give this card so many names that we would be here all night, so I'm not going to waste your time. But let's just put it, it is the strongest spell card that I have ever designed in my entire Yu-Gi-Oh career. My custom card career, to be exact. The continuous spell card, Gates of Infinity. This is the 5th secret weapon that I designed over a deck that I designed more than a that I designed 11. No, I designed this 10 years ago. Sorry, got the years mixed up. 10 years is when I created this. 2013. And the whole reason why I created this in the first place is because my buddy Jason at the time, he had some really powerful spell traps and monsters in his Orichalcos deck. So what did I do? I decided to pretty much take it upon myself and craft what I considered at that time, and I still consider it to this very day, the strongest spell card in existence, in my opinion. That's this thing right here. Now, before I go into the effects of Gates of Infinity, it did have 2 other effects printed on it years and years and years ago. And that was before I essentially brought it back in 2021 and brought it to what you're going to see in just a minute. The 2 effects that this card used to have, and this is the first one. While this card was in my hand, my deck, my graveyard, or while it's banished, it gains these effects. That little sentence right there that I just said is the most broken type of effect you can give to any card, custom cards even. Essentially, at that time, I made Gates of Infinity to what I call a living, breathing Yu-Gi-Oh card. A card that would be always active, no matter what. No matter where you sent Gates of Infinity, it would always be active no matter what. The other effect that this thing used to have is the activation and effects of any card in your hand, your deck, your graveyard, or that you have either just banished or or if it has an effect that can activate while banished, cannot be negated or chained no matter what. That second effect makes this thing scarily, I just made a new word, scarily powerful. This thing, with those 2 aforementioned effects, was single-handedly the driving force behind my old Orichalcos model. And because of those 2 effects, it was one of the reasons why in 2014, when me and Florentine Yugioh decided that this thing needed to be banned. When we banned that a project, Gates of Infinity for a number of years would be eroded completely but turned into a trap card. In 2021, I decided, it's been a good number of years. With the knowledge and skills and custom cards I have now, why not bring this once powerful card back, but put some checks and balances in place, but at the same time, give it the effects that matter. So, that's when I came up with this new revision of Gates of Infinity. So here's what Gates of Infinity does. Just like with the Orichalcos monsters themselves, it cannot be targeted or destroyed by the opponent's card effects, so it's got that Chaos Max protection. And also, during either player's end phase, if your life points are less than 4,000, they go back to 4,000. So it's got that little snippet from Darkness Seed in there. The attack and defense of all monsters your opponent controls become their original attack and defense. Meaning, if this is an Orichalcos mirror match, you're going to lose that bonus that you got from the Seal of Orichalcos. If your life points are 2,000 or less, banish this card. You can only use one of these. You can only use one of the effects of Gates of Infinity once per turn only. And here's those 3 effects. If your opponent activates a spell or trap, negate the activation if you do, and if you do, shuffle it back into the deck. If your opponent summons a monster or monsters, negate the summon of that monster or monsters, and if you do, shuffle that monster or monsters back into the deck. And then the final effect, if your opponent summons a Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Link monster, that monster cannot attack on the turn it is summoned. So it has 3 powerful effects, but I can only use one of them once per turn only. And like I said, if my life points get to that 2,000 life point threshold, this thing is banished. Or if it gets less than 2,000 life, or if it gets less than 2,000, it's still banished. This thing is not just powerful, but it's balanced at the same time, because with the knowledge and skill and customs that I have now compared to what I have then, this thing is a lot better to deal with than it used to be. So that's Gates of Infinity in the nutshell. Next up, we have the anime spell card Illusion Gate. Now, this is how Illusion Gate works. I not only Regeki your board, but I can take any monster from your graveyard and summon it to my field, ignoring all summoning conditions. But there's a price that needs to be paid for using such effects like this. And what's that price, you may ask? Well, it's this. At the end of this turn, your life points are reduced by 90%. So yeah, you get 2 good effects out of the deal, but the price is you lose a good chunk of your life points. So that's what that does. Next up is the continuous spell card Infinity. Now, what does Infinity do? Well, this is what it does. This continuous spell card, while this card is face up on the field, you can treat any normal spell or trap you activate as a continuous spell or trap, and keep it on the field after its effect resolves, instead of sending it to the graveyard. Once per turn only, you can activate the printed effect of a spell or trap that was made into a continuous spell or trap by this card's effect. If this card leaves the field, destroy all spell and traps that were made into continuous spell or traps by this card's effect. Then for each card destroyed, both players take 500 damage. So say, for example, I activate Illusion Gate, for example. Since Infinity's on board, after its effect resolves, instead of going to the graveyard, it'll stay on the field. As long as Infinity exists, it'll remain here. And once per turn only, I can reuse its effect. It's that simple. It's a really innovative spell card. Compliments, by the way, to Florentine Yugioh. He invented this card a number of years ago, so shoutouts to you, bro. Next up is Time Fusion. So, it's an enemy spell card. It was used in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. What this does is I banish 1 card from my hand. Then I target one fusion monster in my extra deck. During my next standby phase after this card's activation, I special summon that target, ignoring all summoning conditions. That monster cannot declare an attack during the turn it is summoned. You can only activate one time fusion per turn. So essentially, I can just plop this guy down, banish a card, and then on my next turn, bust out a fusion. It's that simple. And I have a couple fusions that are targeted towards time fusion that you'll be seeing in a little bit. Next up, one Beckon to Darkness. Now what does Beckon to Darkness do? Simply put it, I send one face-up monster to the graveyard and it does not target. Very good for getting around pesky cards. Chaos Max, for example. Next up, the all-powerful Gravearm card. Essentially, Gravearm is very useful. Not only can I destroy one monster on the field, but while that monster is in the graveyard, it cannot be special summoned. So, yeah, good luck getting your monster back. Next up, we got one Terraforming. Very useful. One copy of Dark Ruler No More, and one copy of Book of Lunar Eclipse to round out our staples. Oh, and by the way, folks, Occult by the Grave is always useful. I love this card, one of my favorite spell cards, and good for the Orichalcos deck. And then the final spell card, and I just gave it its final revision just either yesterday or the day before, Doppelganger! Used by Maximilian Pegasus himself. Basically, to summarize, you activate Doppelganger, and essentially put it, you could target one card on your opponent's side of the field, or that's currently in the graveyard, and essentially turn it into that card. Whether it's a monster, a spell, or a trap, Doppelganger is extremely useful. I highly recommend it for Orichalcos decks and anime character decks alike. It's a really good card. Next up, we get to the trap cards. So first up, one copy of Anime Grave Robber. Essentially put it, he can essentially steal a card from the opponent's graveyard, whether it's a spell, trap, or a monster, and I get to use it. Next up, Trickmere. It's a very good trap card. Essentially, I can only activate it when my opponent activates a trap card. That trap card's effect is activated as this card's effect instead. So say, for example, my opponent activates a Reckless Greed, flip up Trickmere, I get that Reckless Greed's effect instead of you. And then for the final two cards of the deck, well, no, make it free. Sorry, I miscounted my number there. Next up, Briar Transplant. Banish one card on the field that does not target. Chaos Max, anybody? And then, two copies of Rebirth Tablet. Essentially, when one of my monsters is destroyed, I get to resurrect a monster from my graveyard. Any monster I want. And that, my friends, is the Neo Orichalcos / Nightmare Mode deck profile. Now we get into the extra deck, which this extra deck, we're going to be here for a little bit. So first I want to go into the targets for Time Fusion. So for Time Fusion, I have one Panzer Dragon, one Doom Virus Dragon, one Rainbow Neos, one Cyber End Dragon, and one of my favorite fusions, Masquerade the Blazing Dragon. Aha! Get that baby on the field, and it's a Neo Orichalcos deck's best friend. Good luck paying all those life points to activate your effects. Now we get in to the dark synchros of the deck. Because remember, my Neo Orichalcos Shaman can treat itself as a dark tuner. So, without further ado, let's go into to the first two. Starting off, the anime version of Hundred Eyes Dragon. I don't need to say much. If you guys have seen Edo Pro Duel Night, you should know how this works. But unlike the Edo Pro version of Hundred Eyes Dragon, I added one additional effect to this one. And that is, essentially, if this card attacks, my opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. Other than that, it does the same exact things that the anime version of Hundred Eyes does on Edo Pro. Like, for example, it gains the effects of all dark monsters in your grave, and if this thing gets blown up, I can add any card from my deck to my hand. It's that simple. Next up, Demonic Storm Dragon. One of my original Dark Synchros that I used many years ago, and it's the second headliner of this deck. What it does is it cannot be destroyed by battle except by a dragon-type monster. If this card is special summoned, the effects of all other monsters on the field are negated. Once per turn, if your opponent activates a spell or trap, you can discard one card from your hand to negate the activation if you do destroy it. Once per turn only. Being a hard once per turn, you can target one monster in your graveyard. Then, this card gains that monster's effect until the end of the turn. You can only yet control one Demonic Storm Dragon on the field. So he's got some really nice utilities with your other monsters, plus he's really good. Next up, Dark Chargers of the Gate. This was one of the original Dark Synchros that I ran in my version number 2 of the Orichalcos deck back in 2012, 2013. This is a remake of it. I gave it some new artwork that I had that I gave it. Really nice looking too. Looks like a zombie army. Anyway, what he does is once per turn only, meaning a hard once per turn, you can banish one zombie monster from your graveyard to destroy one monster your opponent controls. And a couple of my Orichalcos monsters, I think one or two of them are zombie. My Orichalcos Gygus is a zombie, so I can banish him if I wanted to blow up one of your monsters. And that's how simple it gets with him. Next up, Celeste Archangel of Solitude. This is one of my more powerful Dark Synchros. It's a dark fairy. It's a dark fairy Dark Synchro. 2650 attack. Very odd attack for a Dark Synchro, but it works well. If this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, banish it. Also, special summon one Solitude token to one of your opponent's unoccupied spell and trap card zones. That Solitude token remains in that spell and trap card zone for the next 3 turns. Your opponent cannot set any spell or traps on a spell and trap zone that is occupied by a Solitude token. If this card leaves the field, destroy all Solitude tokens on the field. Then, you gain life points equal to the number of destroyed Solitude tokens times 500. So it's basically, so this card alone can shut down how many monsters your opponent can bring out in a hurry by putting tokens on their field. And not only that, if this guy goes, tokens go, and I get some life points in the process. Next up, Orichalcos Warlock. So just a refresher, he's in my normal build as well. But for those who don't know, he has 2 different effects that I can use. So essentially I can detach a material and I can either blow up a card in the field, or I can banish a random card from your hand. It's just that simple. Next up, Orichalcos Evil Gear. I mentioned him in the normal mode earlier today. If you want to check him out, look in that mode. Look in that deck profile of the normal mode deck profile. Next up, Lilith, Queen of Fiends. She was one of the original Dark Synchro monsters that I ran in my version 2 build of the Orichalcos deck / Nightmare Mode deck years and years ago, like 2012, 2013. More 2013 though. What she does is, once per turn only, if this card destroys a monster, you can special summon one monster from your hand that's level is lower than the destroyed monster's level. This card gains 200 attack and defense for each fiend monster in your graveyard. So this thing can be a big beat stick, and not only that, it is really, really good. Very fun Dark Synchro to use. And that's it for the Dark Synchros. Now for essentially the final 3 cards of the deck. 2 Orichalcos Gem Dragons. I don't need to explain these. If you wanna know how these work, you can check out my previous deck profiles of the challenge. And we also got good old number 200 Orichalcos Soul Eater. He's in the normal deck profile as well. If you wanna know what he does, you can look back on the normal mode deck profile and learn what this guy does. He's an awesome Xyz monster. And with that, folks, that is it for the Orichalcos challenge. Neo Orichalcos / Nightmare Mode deck profile. Late this month, I will get to work on making the hard mode difficulty, and that one should be fully developed and ready to go by mid-October, late October. But anyway, this was the Orichalcos challenge Nightmare Mode deck profile. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and until next time, this is Yu-Gi-Oh! Master 88 saying see you later.